Welcome back, everyone, to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go in to the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. You all know what I'm about to say. Download the app, share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content. And Joe and I, our content is all over social media. All of these interviews we do with Veritas go on X, Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube. And the conversation that we're having today with Paul Kengor, we did a great interview with him a while back, and a book I highly recommend, The Worst of Indignities, The Catholic Church and Slavery. Recommend that book, and please go watch the interview. If you want to sift through all the nonsense out there, and there's a lot of it, Paul Kengor is one of those guys you really ought to be reading, all right? Let me give you his bio real quick for those of you not familiar. Paul Kengor, PhD, is a best-selling author. His works include Dupes, How America's Adversaries Have Manipulated Progressives for a Century, God and Ronald Reagan, God and George W. Bush, God and Hillary Clinton, and The Crusader, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of Communism. His articles appear regularly in publications ranging from USA Today, New York Times. We'll forgive him for that, plus numerous academic journals. He's a professor at Grove City College. He is a frequent commentator on television and radio. Paul earned his bachelor's degree and PhD from the University of Pittsburgh and a master's from American University. Paul is currently the editor of American Spectator. Paul Kengor, our friend. Welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe, brother.
Hey guys, it's great to be back here. I really enjoyed the show last time. And also, I've watched a few episodes since. I really appreciated the Jack Cashel interview that you guys did about
Jack is
New
great.
York. And yeah, that was really good stuff. So it's really enjoyed doing your show. So glad you asked me to come back.
No,
It's
no,
funny
and,
you
and we're
mentioned
proud to have
Jack.
you.
I'm listening to Daryl Cooper do a similar podcast on Newark right now, and
Oh,
it reminded me of what Jack basically put out. That was a great conversation. It's very close to
yeah,
our hearts because that's where we come from.
And for
right.
our audience, today's conversation, Paul has a new book out. And this kind of, for us, Joe's going to get into it. It seems to us like a little bit of a curveball based on what Paul usually is writing about. But this book, which is out from Tan Books, the title is The Stigmatists, Their Gifts, Their Revelations, Their Warnings. So this is going to be a great conversation. Joe Resinello, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Paul, we always start with a prayer to Our Lady. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us, amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Well, as Paul said before the show, we're all running around with like chickens without a head. Everybody's going here. We got crazy stuff going on. I got 5 kids, Paul. My life is insane. We try to get this stuff done. And it's funny why I bring that up. The only time I have to read is on the bus going into New York City. So I just started a new book. And little do I know, see, is your name is in it. We're reading Stephen Mosier, The Devil and the Communists of China. And boom, here's Paul Kengor. You wrote the foreword. Why do I bring that up? This is kind of different than that. This book, Stigmatists, like, you know, I've seen you on PBS. You're very involved in the culture war. And this is, you know, a different type of book. I like your twist to it, Visionary Stigmatists, which we're going to get into. But before we get into, you know, the meat and potatoes of the topic, what is the stigmata? Just for those who may not know, obviously, you know, it's when Christ gives somebody I'll give it New Jersey spin, holes in their hands. But give us like the formal definition.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So to quote St. Paul in Galatians, right? He said, "I bear the marks of Jesus in my hand, on my body," and the marks there in the Greek are stigmata. That's the translation. And in fact, that's an interesting debate right there because most people think that St. Francis was the original stigmatist, right? In fact, it was 800 years ago. We're recording this in the fall of 2024. It was September 17th, 1224, that Francis, in front of that San Damiano cross, he had that amazing moment for the San Damiano cross where Jesus says to him, speaking from the cross, right, Francesco, repara la mia chiesa, repair my church, for it has fallen. And Francis has all these different mystical experiences. About 2 years before his death, he died in 1226. So 1224, he gets the stigmata, and he's in front of a crucifix picture like rays of light coming from the bleeding wounds on Jesus's hands from his feet, just kind of right coming down and piercing the body of Francis. So he had these markings on his hands that identified with Christ's passion on the cross. So most people consider Francis the first stigmatist, but Paul might have been the first. And a lot of people think, well, when Paul's talking that way, he's speaking more metaphorically. He talks about being shipwrecked, flogged, scourged, right? Tortured, left out at sea, all these physical, traumas to his body. But two stigmatists who were remarkable visionaries, St. Anne Catherine Emmerich, 1774, not Saint, she's a blessed, 1774 to 1824. Therese Newman, who died in 20th century. They both had visions of things in the past. I mean, Anne Catherine Emmerich is the famous visionary that Mel Gibson in his movie The Passion bases a lot of his images from her visions. They claim to be able to see moments in the life of Jesus, moments in the life of the Blessed Mother, moments in the lives of the apostles, the disciples, even people like Paul and Francis both. And they both said from their visions, they told their spiritual directors, they said, actually, yeah, Paul was the first stigmatist. Francis was the second. So Francis would have come at that point, 1,100 years almost later, over a millennium later. And since that time, there have been probably, the Vatican, as far as we know, doesn't keep a running list of stigmatists, but it looks like probably about 400 or 500 stigmatists, and many more in recent centuries. And I think that in itself, guys, is an interesting discussion. But kind of like the rise in apparitions and visions of the Blessed Mother in the last couple hundred years, there have also been more stigmatists in the last couple hundred years. And a skeptic might say, well, why? Why now? Why all of a sudden? Well, I wouldn't be so cynical about that. I mean, maybe heaven is speaking to us in a way now where we are today, 20 centuries after the removal of the life of Christ, Christ on this earth. We're at a point now where we need to see more physical manifestations of such supernatural phenomena, right? In our age. We weren't there in the first century to see Jesus and St. Paul and the apostles. So maybe today we need to see those kinds of signs. And these remarkably pious and holy men and women, they've been called living crucifixes. So they are kind of, they are not just symbols, but actually themselves bear in their hands and in their feet, sometimes in their sides, sometimes a crown of thorns, many of them with the shoulder wound of Christ. They bear these markings of Jesus, the suffering Jesus on the cross.
I just want to talk about something just real quick, Joe, what he said, because obviously, it's hard to deny seeing blood coming out of someone's hands. I mean, Padre Pio was a very, very famous stigmatist. We could talk about him later, but you mentioned Emmerich because she was a visionary. And I think, and sometimes when we have these conversations, because, it's on the radio, people are driving in the car. They're like, who are these two crazy people talking about like holes?
Three, we have Paul here.
Yeah, okay. So you know what I'm saying? I try to like remove myself from the conversation and think from their perspective. A visionary, that's real. Because like I want to get into that a little bit, particularly with Emmerich, because I recently read a book on Frances of Rome. She had visions of hell. And I recommend everybody to read that. It'll make you horrified. I mean, like where you're like, oh my goodness, this is insane.
Yeah, give me that reference, by the way, because she's fascinating. Yeah, Frances of Rome.
But talk about Emmerich's visions, because, and we're going to talk about stigmatists, throughout the conversation. But I think these are things, there's certain gifts. We all have gifts, but there are some people who have supernatural gifts. And we should pay attention to people like that, if you ask me, because they're telling us something that we don't know. And many times what they say happens to the letter. So, I mean, talk about what she had to say, because I think that's interesting.
Yeah, she was off the charts. I mean, I think she's the greatest visionary in history of the church. And some have had, doubts about not so much her visions, but maybe the person who was recording them. Bertano was his name, who sat at her side. They think maybe he embellished some of them and so forth. I don't think that's true. There's a debate about that. But either way, she had these incredible visions. And she claimed from the time that she was a child, I mean, she played with what she called the little boy, which was like the young Jesus. She saw John the Baptist as a little girl, and she always saw her guardian angel, as did Padre Pio, as did Gemma Galgani. By the way, Anne Catherine Emmerich and Padre Pio, when they first talked to people who didn't see their guardian angels or the Blessed Mother, they're like, I don't understand. You don't see your guardian angel? Yeah, at first they didn't get it. They were so accustomed to it. Us guys would grow up seeing our brother or sister around the house, right? They just saw these companions all the time. But in her case, she had these incredible visions. And Joe, what the stigmata does for me. So I've read about her visions. I know her visions at Christmas time, Easter time. I read the visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich. I saw the Passion of the Christ with Mel Gibson. And then to later find out that she was a stigmatist who had these exhaustive panels of German doctors, right? MDs, psychiatrists, psychologists, skeptics, atheists, agnostics, spiritual directors, clergy, right? Bishops, Vatican officials, all around her bedside all the time, doing these exhaustive investigations of her wounds and saying, she's not creating these. This isn't made up, right? These are real. This woman is bleeding from her hands and feet. And oh, by the way, in the last decade of her life, while she's bleeding like this, she lived on nothing but the Eucharist. Every day she drank water and the Eucharist. And when they tried to give her anything else to eat, she would vomit it up. And so these doctors would say, not only is she bleeding from her hands and these things aren't getting infected and it's going on all the time, the woman's not eating anything but what she calls the body of Christ, and she's surviving. And she's even gaining some weight while she's laying there in bed. She's not starving from this. So to me, all that physical stuff is kind of like an added affirmation, almost a kind of nihil obstat, an imprimatur in a way of her visions, right? Because somebody so gifted supernaturally, my buddy down the street, Jim, walks up and says, "Hey, Paul, I was out mowing the lawn the other day, and the Blessed Mother appeared to me, and here's what she told me about the end times." All right, and I'm like, "All right, Jim, get out of here, you crackpot!" Right? But if I hear from my neighbor Larry that Jim's laying in his bed bleeding from his hands and his feet, and it's been going on for about a year, and all those cars going to his house and I go in and I see this, I'm like, okay, now Jim's got my attention, right? And in her case, that's what she had. And then she had these visions, not just visions of the past, but of the future. And some of them, one of the ones that really strikes me, Anne Catherine Emmerich said that she was told that 50 to 60 years before the year 2000, all right, the devil would be unchained from the floor of hell. And if you read in the Bible, I mean, the devil is chained to the floor of hell for a certain period of time. This is in Revelation. And then he would be let loose. Now, she's having that vision like 1818. Could she have possibly known that 50 to 60 years before the year 2000, 1940 to 1950, you'd have World War I, right? The most deadly war in the history of humanity, dwarfed World War I in casualties and deaths by like sevenfold. You would have Stalin, the outbreak of the Soviet Union, communism, and the Cold War. Mao Zedong and the communists would take over China in October 1949. No country killed as many people as Mao's China, even more than Stalin's Soviet Union. How do you nail one like that, right? How does some German woman laying in her bed that's never left there, who's already telling you chapter and verse where the Blessed Mother was, where her house was in Ephesus, all these different scenes and places and describing street corners in Jerusalem and Nazareth and Bethlehem that she's never been to before. She's never left her bed in Germany in this convent, right? And now she gives all these predictions going forward. I mean, to me, it's just extraordinary. So beyond the fact that they have these markings from Christ, they're also telling us something, and I want to know what they're telling us.
Paul Kengor is joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Resinello. The book is out from Tan Books, The Stigmatists, Their Gifts, Their Revelations, Their Warnings. Please go out and buy the book. Quick comment, and then I have a question, Paul. My comment is that it's not surprising that Paul Johnson, in his History of the 20th Century, Modern Times, his chapter on Hitler and Stalin is titled "The Devils." Okay.
Yeah. Right.
The devils, not misguided politicians or something. No, the devils. All right. So Let me talk to you real quick about science and blindness. I know that might seem a little weird, but let me put it together for you and throw it over to you. So I'm Catholic. I'm Christian because I believe Jesus Christ rose from the dead. I think there's evidence for that, historical evidence for that. That's why I'm a Christian. I'm Catholic because, and I'm not Protestant for a number of reasons, one of which is the cumulative evidence that we see over 2,000 years, one of which is the stigmata. You could also look at apparitions, okay, where science cannot explain these things. They're still looking at Our Lady of Guadalupe and saying, like Hillary Clinton, oh, who's the artist? God. They can't explain it. They can't explain the shroud. They can't explain Our Lady of Fatima. Even the atheists will deny that there were atheist journalists here that converted after the apparition of Our Lady of Fatima. Okay, because they couldn't explain it. All right, so the science shows, and if you look at, just bringing it back to the stigmata, if you look at Padre Pio, if you look at Emmerich, okay, they were studied. Their wounds were studied, okay, using scientific methods to see what was going on. They're smelling roses coming out of something that just smell like God knows what, okay? And the scientists tell us we have to follow the science, and yet they're blind. And this is really where I want your comment. To me, you're either willfully blind or woefully blind, but it's one of the two, because you're staring at something that you can't explain, and you will deny that it's something supernatural. And that goes, like I said, for apparitions and everything else. I think you know where I'm going, Paul Kengor. I'm throwing it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, think of Thomas, right? The Apostle Thomas. Unless I stick my fingers in the holes in his hands, right, and touch him, I won't believe. I mean, that's me. I mean, I was an agnostic, borderline atheist, late 1980s in college. I was a biochem biophysics major, pre-med major at the University of Pittsburgh. Worked for the organ transplant team at the University of Pittsburgh, and for me, it was a lot of what I was seeing scientifically that convinced me of a designer, the whole genome structure, right? The way your eyeballs work, your mind works, your ears work, everything, reproduction. I mean, to me, it just like, how could this have possibly evolved? So evolution, that's a whole other thing. But when I started seeing reports of different miracles, of different visions, miracle of the sun at Fatima, 70,000 witnesses, incorruptibility among saints. When I did become a Christian through evangelicals, really in the 1990s, I read a book around that period about Padre Pio. I saw pictures of Padre Pio, video of Padre Pio, and this guy for 50 years bled from his hands. You can't fake that. You can't make that up. Interestingly, I think some of the ones, Joe, that are even more extraordinary are the various women, and they're more often women. Over 90% of stigmatists have been women. That's an interesting thing. But they'll start like clockwork on a Thursday. Okay, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, right? Like clockwork on a Thursday. They go from being fine, chipper, walking around. I need to lay down. And they lay down, and here's the clergy start gathering around. The doctor's like, here she goes, right? Lay down in the bed. Their hands are out. Everyone knows what's coming because they've been doing this every Thursday for like 10 or 20 years. Nothing, no bleeding yet. All of a sudden, they start to get into a kind of agony, right? By 3 o'clock on Good Friday, man, they are on the rack. They are on the cross, and then they start bleeding from their hands and the blood's coming out and everybody's watching this, and there's no way these women are faking this, right? Everybody's been watching it for 48 hours, and then after that, on Friday comes around, Saturday morning, the bleeding slowly stops, hands completely healed, not even scabs, right? And yeah, you're a doctor, you're an agnostic, you're an atheist, and you walk away from that and you say, uh, I'm a, I'm a believer. At the very least, I can't make that up. What is happening here is beyond a physical explanation in this world. I don't know if I believe in Jesus or whoever these doctors would say, right? But that is supernatural. So yeah, so that that's highly convincing. And in our skeptical age, especially being again 2,000 years removed from the time of Christ and the apostles, I think we need signs like that, literal signs, stigmata
Mm-hmm.
in some cases.
Paul, let me follow up, Joe, if you don't mind. Let me follow up for a quick comment on this, because I can hear maybe some of our listeners here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. We're being joined by Paul Kengor here at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. Stigmatists, their gifts, their revelations, their warnings. That's available at Tan Books. Here's a question that comes to mind. You've obviously have spoken to agnostics, atheists. The common refrain is, "How could a good God allow pain and suffering?" Amongst his people. here's what I want to throw at you. Not only does Jesus allow pain and suffering in the case of stigmatists, it's a gift. It's a gift that Jesus is gift. The pain and suffering is a gift. Now, I can understand how people don't understand that paradox, that the pain and suffering that they're experiencing is a gift, but it is. I'd love for you to explain why Jesus gives this pain and suffering to certain, you mentioned 400 or 500 individuals over the course of the last, since I guess St. Francis. Why does Jesus do this?
Yeah, I was looking at my book there for a quote from Gemma Galgani, but I think I could get it for you off the top of my head. But she and a number of others said, including Saint Faustina, that if you only knew how much suffering pleases Jesus when it's united to his suffering, when it's offered up for his purposes, and to help in expiation for the sins of the world, everybody would want to suffer. And one of the I have 7 specific chapters in the book that profile individual stigmatists. One of them is a little nun from Calabria named Blessed Elena Aiello, and she's fascinating. And all 3 of us have Italian backgrounds. My mom's 100% Italian, and they're from the area of Calabria, Reggio Calabria, not far from where this little nun was from. So she really got my attention. I think she ended up being the longest chapter in the book. And she said that Jesus told her, and she told this to her spiritual director in turn, Elena Aiello. She said, suffering is not the biggest evil in the world. Sin is. It's sin, not suffering. And as an evangelical, I remember in the 1990s, all these books coming out with titles like, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? Right? Mm. And it'd be all this head scratching by sort of health and wealth gospel types. Like, I became a Christian, and now people around me, they're dying and they're suffering. My spouse has cancer. Why, Lord? Why? Well, Jesus said, if you want to follow me, pick up your cross and carry it, right? WWJD, what would Jesus do? Aha. He would suffer. He would get holes in his hands and in his feet and bleed to death on the cross. He would suffer. I mean, that's what we're called to do. This is, I think, theologically profound. Several of the stigmatists, including Anne Catherine Emmerich, said, you want to know the wound that causes me the most pain? You can't see it. It doesn't bleed. It's right here, right? It's the shoulder wound, the shoulder wound. And when I talked to Jesus about it, he said, yes, that was the most painful wound. That was the most vexing wound. That one hurt me most of all. And it's fascinating, isn't it, that Jesus tells us, and what's that wound from? From carrying the cross on the way to Calvary. So the very wound that symbolizes the carrying of the cross, which is what Jesus tells us to do. If you want to follow me, pick up your cross and carry it. So if we only knew, and guys, when I first came into the Catholic Church, I remember a group of older women, old ladies in one of our book clubs, and one of them was suffering at that particular time from something. And one of the other ladies said, hey, offer it up. She's like, yes, I'll offer it up. I'll offer it up. And I asked him, I said, what does that mean? Offer it up. I often say this to my Protestant students. I'll talk about Lent, mortification. And they'll say, mortification. What is that? What's mortification? But offering it up means that you say to the Lord, Lord, I'm really suffering right now. This is really painful. What good can come from this? This sucks, right? This is painful. I hate this. Lord, can I do something with this suffering? Well, maybe offer to unite it with Jesus to perhaps take away from suffering from someone on this planet who's suffering right now from something else they've been suffering from for 10 or 20 years. And in the case of Gemma Galgani, Jesus said to her, have you prayed for the souls in purgatory lately? And she said, no, I haven't. And he said, offer up your suffering for the souls in purgatory. You have no idea how much you doing that benefits those souls. So this is something that's kind of off the radar of a lot of modern Christians today. I'll say one more thing. My evangelical friends would say, you Catholics, you got Jesus in your church hanging on the cross, the corpus, right? But Christ has risen, brother, right? In our churches, we have an empty cross. Don't you know that Christ came off the cross? Yeah, we
Yeah.
do, right? Our church, the first 4 centuries, put together the canon of the New Testament that's called the Bible. We know, but when we walk into our church on Sunday, by the way, or every day, because we have mass every day, we go in and we take our suffering in, and we're going through troubles. We have a kid that's sick, we have a wife with cancer, and we look in there, and where's Jesus? Right? Suffering, bleeding. We're like, oh, yeah. If they could do that to the Son of God, if he had to suffer like that, then surely I have to suffer too. And oh yeah, my Bible says,
Yeah.
if you want to follow me, pick up your cross. Yeah, I get it. I get it. So this is something that we Catholics get better than Protestants. And one more thing, very, very, very few stigmatists have been non-Catholic. And one study that was done by a French doctor in 1894 found no non-Catholics who were stigmatists. And I bet a lot of Protestants that they read this book will be like, "Yeah, these people are all Catholics. This is a Catholic thing. Why does he only ask the Catholics to bear the stigmata?" Well, maybe because in our theology, unlike yours, we really understand suffering.
Yeah.
Francis had suffered so much and went through such, self-inflicted mortification that he almost killed himself, right?
Died at
So
42.
we understand it and grasp it, and embrace it,
Yeah.
embrace the cross more than the other side does, more than Protestants do.
Absolutely. Paul Kengor is joining us here. The Stigmatists, their gifts, their revelations, their warnings. The book is available at Tan Books. I'll give you a quick comment, Paul, because Joe and I actually, before you came on, we were talking about pain. I just got over my second hip replacement in the last 4 months, so I'm experiencing some certain level of pain. Joe was talking about his shoulder and all these things. We could, this is for the audience out there. I hate to use the word happy. Let's just say happy. I'm happy that through it and getting back to work and everything, experiencing this pain, I do know that when I go to work, I do say, Jesus, take this pain and do whatever you need to with it. Just,
Yeah,
and help me please to bear it well. And it's been painful. I'm not going to lie. All right.
right. It sucks.
It
We
was
don't
like,
like it.
yeah, I
Yeah,
was like, Jesus, but please do something with it. I don't want it to go to waste. And the reason why I did that, because I
right.
haven't always done that as a Catholic, because of books like yours and listening to other people, as they used to say in Italian, offer it up. The old
Mm-hmm.
Italian lady,
Right.
offer it up. All right. Paul, what's your social media? Where can people find you? American Spectator, and then we'll take a quick break.
Yeah, so I do have an X account. I don't use it very much, but I'm the editor for the American Spectator, which is spectator.org. And if you go there, look under the authors, click me, and you can follow me and get my articles. I also write often for Crisis Magazine and National Catholic Register.
Yeah, we got to get Eric Sammons back here one of these days. That guy, that dude's
He's really good.
that he's really, really good. So we're with Paul Kengor here at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial. Stick with us. We had another great half hour about the stigmatists. We'll be right back.
If you need me till 11:36, I can do it.
We're going to be fine.
Okay.
All right, let's rock. Welcome back, everyone, to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello. We're way in the breach with Paul Kengor, and we're proud to say a friend of the program. Paul is the editor of the American Spectator magazine. He is also in a new book that's out from Tan Books, The Stigmatists, Their Gifts, Their Revelations, Their Warnings. The first half hour was great, and this is going to be another great segment. Paul, real quick, aside from we always encourage our audience to buy the book from the publisher, but where else, if they'd like to, can they buy the book? Where is it available?
Well, Amazon would be easiest, and if not, go to Tan Books. So Tan Books is, I think, the top Catholic publisher. Ignatius is great as well. Ignatius Press, Sophia Institute. I've now done, I think this is my third book through Tan Books, so it's just a great group.
I want to make a comment, then I'm going to hand it over to Joe, not really having to do with your book. And Paul, you have to understand, Joe and I, obviously, and you do too, we understand as Roman Catholics, we understand what we're involved with here in the modern times, in the modern era. It's the spiritual battle, it's the culture war, and we're constantly hammering, and not just because you're a friend of the show, but it's true. We have to support you, American Spectator, Tan Books, Sophia Press. We're on the, everybody's on the front line because we're not concerned about, okay, the politics are important, but we're concerned about souls and people in the way to
Right.
salvation. The first thing you have to do, Jesus said, if you have eyes to see, then see. we have to help. And so I'm encouraging people to go out there and support whoever you can who's on the front line of this spiritual battle. I promise you, Jesus is going to reward you for it, because, we as Catholics, we can't just sit on our hands. It's insanity and it's evil. So I just wanted to throw in that comment and then throw it over to Joe Resinello.
Hey,
Well,
by the way, could I add
please,
there,
please, please.
when people plug books, everybody thinks that book authors make a bunch of money. You do. Very, very, very few do. I think for each book that you sell, you make maybe it's like 10%. It's like maybe, and then if you had got an advance or something, like you got to sell almost like 100,000 books to make money off of it, and then and you never do that. So real people don't get it. But we write books like this. It really is to get a message out. And you don't make money off books unless you're like Oprah Winfrey, Bill O'Reilly, or somebody like that.
Right, man, and that's true. But and like you said, the good thing is to pay attention to the people that are talking about these things. That's why I mentioned earlier in the show in the beginning that people ought to go out and buy your book, Worst of Indignities. All right, because that book is fantastic, and again, cuts through a lot of the nonsense that's out there regarding race and slavery and everything else. So please, everyone, if you heard that, go out and buy The Worst of Indignities by Paul Kengor. Joe Resinello.
Well, on the other side of the break, we were talking about Catherine Emmerich. We were talking about some amazing things that shouldn't happen but did. And basically, you commented on those saying, how could you not believe? And I want to explore that a little bit, because ultimately, there's been miracles for 2,000 years, tons of miracles. Every saint, just about every saint, has two miracles outside of, the stigmata, which is an incredible event. Incredible. Why people don't believe is because they don't want to change. Like
Right.
you can go to see Padre Pio. He looks better than me, and he's been dead since 1968. I mean, like he's
Incorruptibility. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, look at Padre. Look
yeah.
at the people. Google Padre Pio, New York Times, Pope Francis, and look at the photo that pops up by a Times photographer that they actually ran in the New York Times. And look at Pio in that glass, and you'll be blown away. Joe's right. He looks better than he did the week before he died.
So I mean, like you see something like that, and like, how could you not change? Because you don't want to. You see, that's
Right.
where it comes right. And that's what I think I want to talk a little bit about, because there's tons of stuff. Like if you were really like, we've had the Miracle Hunter on the show a bunch of times. He's Michael. He's a great guy from Chicago. And I mean, if you just like binge listen to his show, you would be like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. There's tons of miracles for 2,000 years. How could you not be like, this is real? This happened. This is not the figment of like some crazy people's imagination. We don't want to change. We just don't want to change. What are your thoughts on that? Because to be honest with you, if you read your book and you listen to some of these visionaries and you hear firsthand accounts of scientists, not Dr. Fauci, everybody, scientists telling you things, you would be like, I got to believe. I got to go into the Catholic Church. I got to be Catholic. I got to live a good life. I want to go to heaven. I don't want to go to hell. But that's not what we want to do, because we don't want to change. What do you think?
Yeah, that's right. These people claim to be open-minded. They're not open-minded at all. I read everything, and that's one of the reasons that led me into the Catholic Church. Not that long ago, I met the mother of the child who was born dead, who was resuscitated after like 10 minutes or something like that. Who's the case for the cause of canonization for Fulton Sheen. And I was speaking in Peoria, and I was speaking on Pope John Paul II, Fulton Sheen, and Ronald Reagan. It was at Eureka College. And I found out that she was coming to my talk. And that's all I cared about when I found that out. I said, I've got to meet her. I've got to meet her. I've got to talk to her. And I started talking to her. And as usual, guys, I'm a skeptic, right? I go into the skeptical. I'm kind of like, oh, yeah, all right. And then what happened? And then and I asked a lot of questions. And then I read a couple articles, and I read her book, and I read it very, very carefully, and I read everything else. And I thought, man, this is real. This actually happened. I mean, we've got these testimonies from the first responders, the doctors, the nurses. I mean, there's no way that somebody can be born dead, not breathing for this long, this little kid, and not have severe brain damage. And the kid is in perfect shape. This is a miracle. This is a miracle. And I like reading about these because they help my faith. And in many cases, yeah, something will start as a claimed miracle or apparition or whatever and turn out not to be the case. But the ones that are scrutinized, where the Vatican's devil's advocate, as he's called, is sent in, where the teams of investigators and medical scientists, I mean, the Vatican, non-Catholics don't understand this. The Vatican wants to get it right. The last thing they want to do is give their stamp of approval for a quote unquote miracle that turns out not to be one, to be hoodwinked. I mean, that's a major blow to their credibility. They do exhaustive analyses of these things. I mean, look at Medjugorje, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like millions of people have gone there and claimed to see the sun dancing and talk to the Blessed Mother and all of the. I meet these people all the time, and the church still is super cautious about this and hasn't affirmed the divine origins of whatever is going on there, right? And so many Catholics are saying, I don't understand this. I know I've got hundreds of friends who've gone there and talked to the Blessed, but the church is incredibly careful about this. It's not sloppy about it at all. So yeah, Joe, I think you're right. Oftentimes the people who discount these things, they don't want to believe in them, and they won't even take the time to read about it. I took the time to read a bunch of biographies of Padre Pio. I have it's right over there. I won't grab it right now. But the new book, it was published by Ignatius on the 1921 official Vatican investigation and deposition of Padre Pio. That stuff wasn't released until like 2008 in Italian. And then Father Fessio and Tony Ryan and Mark Brumley and my good friends at Ignatius Press, they got the Italian and they published a translation of it. And you go through and you read page after page after page of these official depositions, interviews with Padre Pio, investigations of his wounds, and it's fascinating. And it's very clear that it's real. They're not making it up. Padre Pio, in one case, one of the doubters, Padre Gemelli, who was a Vatican official who was very conceited. I've got a chapter on this in the book. And folks, I got to warn you, when you read about Padre Pio's doubters, it's painful. And he even said the worst torture pain that he had was not so much the wounds in the hands and in the side, right? But the doubters and the clergy. He said that was most painful for him. But one of the psychologists who investigated him said, I know what is causing Padre Pio's wounds. I mean, it's obvious that, okay, he's clearly bleeding from his hands and his feet, and he couldn't have caused this on his own. And he can't be doing this with acid or by jamming a screwdriver in his head. I mean, these are going nonstop. But I figured out what it is. Yes, because I'm an expert psychiatrist. The cause of this is autosuggestion. Autosuggestion, right?
That's the ticket.
Pio is causing these wounds by autosuggestion. Right? So imagine this, right? Like I'm looking at my hands. Are you ready? They start bleeding. And Pio says, ask that psychiatrist to imagine that he's a bull, and let's see if horns sprout from his head. Right? Autosuggestion. That's a greater leap of faith than believing that Pio was sitting in front of Our Lady of Grace Chapel and Jesus, through rays of light from the crucifix, put the holes into his hands. Autosuggestion. Yeah. I mean, why not say snake handling, right? Why not say that he went out and got some leeches, right? That's insane.
Paul Kengor.
A lot of these skeptics end up embarrassing themselves with their skepticism.
Well, and that's the thing. I think that's why we're talking about, like, there was like the evidence and looking at it. I'm so happy you said, Paul Kengor. I'm so happy you mentioned this first skeptic is the church. The church needs to do an investigation. I like sometimes you really be surprised. Like in my conversation, I have conversations with atheists, with non-Catholic Christians. You'd be surprised how little they actually know about the Catholic Church. Now I know that's anecdotal. That's my own personal experience, but I got a big mouth. I think you know that about me, right? I talk to a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people about important things like religion, okay, and our religion and our faith. People don't know. Like if you like I have an atheist friend who swears I'm wrong that the scientific method was created and developed by the Catholic Church and given to Western civilization. I thought his brains were going to fall out. Okay.
Well, then if you give him a book and tell him to read it, he won't read it. That's what
Well,
really frustrates me.
Joe Resinello has some good stories about that. We won't get into that today. About the same thing with Protestants. When you present them something that's showing evidence, all right, the first impulse is get that away from me.
Right.
I don't want to see that. Let's keep it moving. So I said to my wife back in 2017, Paul Kengor, I said, look, no one knows the day or the hour when Jesus is going to return. Okay. But this was in 2017 on the I guess that was the anniversary of Our Lady of Our Lady of Fatima. Oh,
Right.
yes, yeah, Our
Yep.
Lady of Fatima. But I said to my wife, I said, if he came back now, I'm not going to be shocked. All right, now I'm
Oh, yeah.
going somewhere with this, and I want you to tie this into a lot of what's going on out there. The one thing that stigmatists, like you said, they have the ability to see. They have visions. They could see things that our Lord or Our Lady wants them to see. Particularly maybe about the future, particularly about maybe the end days, the last days, the end times. What are some things that some of the stigmatists have said they've seen about what the situation will be like at the time of the second coming of Christ?
Well, that's what really got me about this, Joe, and that's why I decided to write the book because of the remarkable prophecies and forecasts that a bunch of them have had about the end times and the last days. And again, I might ignore that if it was being made by my friend Jim down the street mowing his lawn. All right. But when it's made by an official saint or blessed who's been exhaustively investigated, now I'm not just all eyes, I'm all ears. All right. I want to hear what they have to say. And a bunch of them have predicted, chastisement, fireball from the sky, worse than the great deluge, than the great flood, days of darkness, 3 days of darkness. And I say a bunch of them. Let me give you a few examples. So Saint Faustina Kowalska, who is the first saint of the new millennium, first canonized saint of the new millennium, born 1905, died 1938. She was 33 years old. She's the Divine Mercy Saint, the Apostle of Mercy. Not only does she preach this message of mercy, but when you read her diary, which the three of us probably have and which millions of Catholics have read, she's probably the most famous saint of our modern era, most well read, her diary. You're really struck when reading through it about all the prophecies of the end times. And Jesus told her explicitly, and she says in his diary, he said, "You will prepare the world for my second coming." All right. And she talks about days of darkness, Jesus appearing in the sky after this period of darkness. The only light that will emerge will be the figure of him in the sky on the cross with rays of light coming out from his hands and his feet. By the way, that really struck me because many of these stigmatists that are penetrated in the hands and feet, it happens in front of a crucifix of the live Christ who comes alive on the crucifix, and rays of light come from his hands and his feet and penetrates them. So she had that vision. Again, died in 1938, first saint of the new millennium. Let's make this really current. The Our Lady of Akita seer, Sister Agnes, who died just a few weeks ago. Okay, I think August 2024.
Correct.
She's the one who had the incredible prophecy, several of them, but October 13, 1973, the anniversary of the Fatima miracle of the sun. In fact, her Bishop Ito, who approved of her visions as being of supernatural origin, he said it's perfectly consistent that she would have this vision on the anniversary of the miracle of the sun, because the message of Our Lady of Akita is the message of Our Lady of Fatima. It's the same message. If you do not make reparation, if you do not change, there will be this great chastisement. She had the vision October 13th, 1973, the prophecy about a time will come in the church of bishops fighting bishop, clergy fighting clergy, cardinals fighting clergy. And she talked about this chastisement, this ball of fire from the sky, worse than the great deluge. And she just died. And guess what? A lot of people don't realize this about Sister Agnes. She was a stigmatist when she was having those visions. And her bishop even said that she had the stigmata when she was having those visions. Sister Elena Aiello likewise had this ball of fire from the sky, 3 days of darkness. In fact, Sister Aiello said 70 hours of darkness. She pegged it down to the hour. So 72, I guess, would be technically 3 days. Who knows about the translation? Maybe she said 72. But they've all had that. And it seems to me that the prophecies that they're having and the times that they're having it, and I'm giving you just 20 and 21st century saints and blesseds and people in the church. If it doesn't apply for now in the early 21st century, I mean, I don't know when. Anne Catherine Emmerich said Satan unchained for 50 to 60 years before the year 2000, 1940, 1950. So it makes
Then you
sense
have
to
also
me
Pope.
that we're living in it. I don't know when
Then
exactly the day and hour will be, but
you also
yeah,
have Pope Leo the 13th vision
right.
before he wrote the Saint Michael prayer. See, that's what I
Yeah,
mean. Is like again, I wouldn't take any individual instance, but when you look at it cumulatively, if it doesn't at least make you want to dig deeper, then
right.
then I don't know. Go back to reading all those love novels or whatever it is you're reading,
Exactly. Yeah, what a
or
waste of your
go
time, man. That stuff's
right.
all
That's
made up too.
right.
Come
And
on.
then look, as far as it goes, Joe and I have said on the show, this is just a true statement. It's not genius on my part. Everybody's going to have their own individual judgment. Your end is going to come for each of us individually. But Jesus said, you see the clouds, you know the rain's coming. Okay.
Right.
And you can't see the signs of the times. Now, of course, that's 2,000 years ago, but it's really progressively, aside from the 1,000 year, let's call it reign of the Catholic Church, okay? Starting with Protestantism, starting with Luther and the revolutionaries, start going through the Enlightenment and everything else. If you can't see the signs of the times and how this is the cumulative effect, if you don't think that men and women's bathrooms and vice versa is a natural consequence of all of that, then dude, you need to have your eyes open. You
It's
really
never been
need.
worse, never been worse than it is now. And people will say, oh, come on, we've had wars and plagues before, far worse wars. Yeah, but I mean, first of all, the worst ones we've had have been modern, right? World War I, World War II, and so forth, ideologies like communism. But never before in history have men and women not been able to decide what gender they are. I
Right.
mean, you were male or female. There wasn't over 100 different gender options. We've never redefined marriage like this as anything but between male and female. I mean, the family, the disintegration of the family, the rates of disbelief in the world, in the West, in the United States, and again, clergy against clergy, bishops against bishop, the confusion that we're getting in the Catholic Church. It's never been crazier or worse than it is today, no question.
Well, like we said, Paul Kengor, that's why we all have to open our eyes. One of the ways everyone out there could do that at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network is please go out and buy Paul's book, The Stigmatists, their gifts, their revelations, their warnings. It is available on Amazon. We would encourage everyone to please go out and buy it from Tan Books so we can not only support Paul, but we could also support our publisher, in this case, Tan Books. Paul, real quick, the website again for the American Spectator.
Yeah, spectator.org.
Spectator.org. Go put in your email. This way you get all the articles that are coming out at the American Spectator. Joe Resinello.
I want to talk a little bit about why God would do some of these things. Because again, stepping back, people on the radio, they're like, these crazy Catholics. Why are we talking about days of darkness? Good Lord, what is going on? Why would Jesus, oh my Jesus, he's so sweet, Jesus, the baby Jesus. Why would he do that? Because he wants you in heaven. And we're not converted. You know, we talked about suffering. Suffering purifies us. You also talked about purgatory. You know, all of us are trying. None of us are Jesus and the Blessed Mother, and we're limping along and we're trying our best and we're doing everything we can do. We go to the sacraments, we pray, we fast, we do our best, but we're not there. I mean, you talk about the diary. I've read that, and this is my 2 cents. The Vatican hasn't called me yet, Paul, for my opinion. They will, but not yet. I think she's going to become a doctor of the church.
Yeah.
Faustina. That's my 2 cents. But you read in that diary nuns who were in purgatory asking for her prayers. Now, a regular person might see a nun and be like, she's going straight to heaven. Because Jimmy down the street, who's a good guy, he's in heaven too. But God does these things because he wants us to be pure. He wants us to be in union with himself. And that's a process. Suffering does that. And these visions shake us. They get our attention because we don't listen. We don't listen to truth. We don't listen to logic. There's so much of that now on the internet. If you really, I mean, there's crazy people on the internet. I'm on the
Like
internet
us.
and I'm half crazy. But in terms of like, There are people who are telling you things that you should frankly be able to connect the dots and look at them clearly, and no one does. But when the darkness comes for 3 days, that might get your attention. Talk about that, because you talked about Protestants. They don't seem to connect that. They don't, or they just think we're like these like down and dour Christians. No, no. I'm looking at things in a sober manner. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, although most conservative Protestants, right, have no doubt about end times and final judgment and that sort of thing. Now, I can see, Sister Social Justice watching this and thinking, boy, Professor Kengor and Joe, that's such a dark message that they're giving here today. I mean, I've read Faustina's diary. She's the apostle of mercy, boys, right? She's all about divine mercy, an ocean of mercy. Yes, she is, all right. But why that ocean of mercy? Because the time of judgment is coming because of the end times. So she's trying to tell you, right? Jesus is saying to her, you're the one that will prepare the world for my final coming. All right. Well, because that final coming is coming and you're going to be judged and there's going to be days of darkness and all this calamitous stuff and chastisements. All right. Because of that, you need mercy and you need it now. And you need to know, right? In fact, Jesus says, and she says in her diary, that one of the things that offends Jesus the most is people who refuse to come to his mercy, especially those suffering souls who believe that they've sinned so badly that they don't merit his mercy. And he's telling them, no, my mercy is limitless. It's an ocean of mercy. That's when you really need to come to me. So that's a preparation for the end times, right? How should we really all prepare for the end times? Seek God's mercy. So if that fireball from the sky comes and wipes out you and your family, right, you will have gone to confession. You will have sought mercy. You will become a better person. You will prepare the people around you and your family and your friends. So when the final judgment comes, you can go to heaven. So why do you need mercy? Because of that judgment, because of the end times. So these two messages go together. They come together.
Paul Kengor is joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. I'm going to stay right there because I want to follow up on that. But very quickly, the book is the Stigmatists, their gifts, their revelations, their warnings. It is available on Amazon. We would encourage you to buy it at TAM Books. We only have about 3 minutes left, Paul, but I want to stay right there. Okay. St. Louis de Montfort basically gave us our marching orders. He said, Mary, Our Lady, will raise up apostles in the latter times, which is what you were just talking about, to make war against the evil one. So here's what I'm going to throw over to you. People think war. Okay. Yes, the soldiers at Lepanto, they actually had to go out and fight a physical battle. Okay. The soldiers at Tours under Charles Martel, they had to go out and fight a physical battle. If you want to fight this battle, then this is where I'm going to throw it over to you. Go to confession. Go to mass every week. Pray the rosary like Our Lady told you to. Okay. Or your mother told you to pray. Pray the rosary. Okay. And do the things. If you want to make war against the devil, nothing punches him in the face more than a Catholic acting like a Catholic. Paul, you got about 2 minutes. I'm throwing it over to you.
No, that's great. I love that message and to close on that. Yeah, it's not the year 1095 when you need to get authorization from the Pope to go to Jerusalem to liberate it from the Muslims, right? I mean, no, in fact, our battle today could be as simple as what you guys are doing. Right? Podcasts, online, on radio, on the internet, whatever, communicating with people, because you need to convert souls. And really, in the end, it's not a matter of physically defeating somebody on the battlefield, right? But just getting people to, and I'll use some language from my evangelical days, right? Accept Christ as their Lord and Savior, right? Seek confession, seek absolution. And these stigmatists, they played a role in helping the expiation of the sins of the world. Their job wasn't to evangelize, to go on radio, obviously, a few hundred years ago. It wasn't to proselytize. It wasn't to give out the Eucharist as a priest in front of a bunch of people, right? It was to join in Christ's suffering for the expiation of sins. So they were called to a very unique charism that the vast majority of us aren't. But we all have our different individual roles to play.
And I think that's the important thing. I mean, is to say, like, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, don't think anything is small. Don't think anything. If you're doing it for Christ, remember, we're small. He's not. And he's not abandoning us to this. I mean, sometimes we can all feel a little, what is the prayer in the Divine Mercy? In times of when you feel despondent, You know, when you feel moments of despair and you're
Right.
don't just do. I know our Protestant brothers and sisters don't like that. Just do. You got to pray. You got to do these things. And then guess what? Yeah, the end might come. Okay. And obviously on that level, it's tragic, but there's a peace there. If you've done what Jesus has told you to do, okay, and you fought the good fight, all right, you're going to heaven, and that's what it's all about anyway. Paul Kengor, one more time, any social media, your website, and where folks could buy the book.
Well, for the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. Yeah, the
Amen.
message of divine mercy. Spectator.org, follow me there, and you can get this book at Tan Books or at Amazon. And great joining
Okay.
you guys again. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. And the book is The Stigmatists, Their Gifts, Their Revelations, Their Warnings. Paul Kengor, it's been too long since we've spoken to you. We're going to have you back a lot sooner this time around. Thanks again, brother.
Yeah, let's do it again, guys. Thanks. God bless.
Absolutely. God bless you. And thank you for all out there for joining us here at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Download the app, share it with your friends, and wherever you're seeing Joe and Joe on social media, X, Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube, please like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Help us out. Share this conversation. Please do that. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.